Now that the New Orleans Saints have landed edge rusher Chase Young, they can be a lot more aggressive in the draft and with their draft picks. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode, we're taking a look at more of the impact of the New Orleans Saints signing Chase Young. We're going to be taking a look at taking a deeper look at his impact on the Saints draft philosophy and how they can be a little bit more aggressive going into the draft. So we'll take a look at all that, as well as where I think the weakest spot in the draft is and how the New Orleans Saints can navigate that now that they don't need all or as much of their draft capital. We're going to break it all down, including them also trading for a veteran player or potentially getting very aggressive in the first round. We got all that coming up for you today. We appreciate you very much for being an everydayer and making us your first listen here on the Locked On Saints podcast, proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On for $20 off of your first order. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed with Game Time. So now that the New Orleans Saints have their edge rusher in Chase Young, that might be a spot where you can kind of check a box. I mean, they've got 7 of the guys on the roster, including, of course, Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson, who are your established starters and veterans. And then you've also got guys like Tanoh Kpassagnon, who can rotate in and out. Young guys like Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey and Nico Lalos as well. Now you add Chase Young to that number, and the Saints have effectively what they need to figure out the right combination of defensive ends and edge rushers to carry into the 2024 season. So this does allow them to be a little bit more aggressive in round one with their top draft capital, especially in round one where you're talking about, a good set of offensive tackles, a great set of edge rushers, a good set of wide receivers, all of that. Now, in order for the Saints to really be able to maximize their ability to get aggressive in the first round and with the draft, I do think that adding more offensive line talent would really kind of solidify that. There was an early report that Oli Udoh was going to be coming here to New Orleans, former Minnesota Viking, formerly of Elon University, 2019 guy. We looked at him as a potential late draft pick for the Saints during that draft cycle. But we haven't been able to confirm that report, nor have we seen that report confirmed yet. So I'm holding off on that. But if the Saints were to land Oli Udoh and then they were to turn around and maybe get Dalton Risner or some interior offensive lineman that challenges at left guard, it really then kind of opens up the real ability to be aggressive in the first round, but they're on their way there. So the reason why I highlight this is because I kind of mentioned it in yesterday's episode when we were breaking down the Chase Young signing, that the Saints might be able to get aggressive. And I said something that I thought people were going to hate. An idea around potentially trading up in round one to go and get yourself a playmaker on the offensive side, like maybe one of the top wide receivers that drops out of the top 5, top 6. And I thought people were going to hate it, but I think a lot more of you jived with it than I expected. So I wanted to then give it the attention that it deserves as an idea that maybe you entertain. So here's a potential sort of mock trade that I kind of drew up for the New Orleans Saints to land a big time playmaker over on the offensive side of the football. And it does include trading up in round one. So one of the things that I was looking at is either trading up with the Tennessee Titans at pick 7 or the New York Giants at pick 6. I don't know yet which one of those two is more likely to trade out of their spot. It feels like Tennessee maybe is closer there. Saints could go so far as to try to move up into the top 5 with this, almost said San Diego Chargers, haven't done that in a long time. The Los Angeles Chargers, who are kind of set at quarterback. They could fall back to 14, maybe still land like a Brock Bowers or still get an offensive tackle, whatever it is that they're looking for there. But I do think that a realistic option could be the Titans at 7. It would maybe cause them to miss out on Joe Alt, depending upon what the New York Giants do at 6, but it would still put the Titans in position to land like and Olu Fashanu, for instance, out of Penn State. Which, by the way, if the Saints still made the decision to just stand pat at 14 and draft Olu Fashanu, I'm over the moon. I think that that's a great selection for them. I'm completely convinced he's going to be great at the next level. But to entertain this idea, what I did was that I went through a mock draft simulator to look at the potential trades. I also used both the Rich Hill and Jimmy Johnson trade value charts to look at the opportunity to move up to 7 and what it would cost the Saints. So obviously you're talking about trading this year's first and next year's first to get from 14 into the top 7, right? No matter what, that's going to be the case. And maybe you get away with being able to move a second round, a future second and, some other piece. You can maybe package this year's first and second, but I wanted to hold on to that second round selection. But what I ended up doing was trading the Saints 14th overall selection, so round one of their 4 fifth round selections, and next year's one to move up to 6 with the Giants. If I'm looking at moving up with the Titans, I was able to just package this year's first and next year's first to move up to 7. Didn't have to give up the extra 5th, but I don't mind giving up the extra 5th. You don't really need all those anyway. To grab Rome Odunze, the amazing wide receiver out of Washington, and somebody that is one of those guys that, you draft him and then all of a sudden he is your, X receiver, your outside split zone, not split zone, but split, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Split end. There we go. Split end, weak side wide receiver that complements Chris Olave on the opposite side, that complements, a guy like A.T. Perry that you can move around, a guy like Rashid Shaheed, Cedric Wilson, all these guys that you can kind of move around a little bit. And I don't think that it's a bad idea. And really, if you did that to 6 or 7, it's whichever of the top 3 wide receivers is available for you. I mean, you imagine that there's the majority of people, myself included, assume that Marvin Harrison Jr., the young wide receiver out of Ohio State, will be the first wideout off the board. Malik Neighbors, there are some people saying that he might be the first. So you can kind of put them as your top 2, but landing a Rome Odunze is far from being a situation to where you feel bad, right? And so if you've signed Chase Young, if you do indeed get Oli Udoh, if you do indeed land another interior offensive lineman or are comfortable grabbing an offensive lineman elsewhere in the draft, which is possible. I also in this mock draft did, I just kind of kept going through it just for fun, but I also traded 170 and 175 in order to move up to 127 with the Houston Texans. Trade value pretty even there, 2/5 to move into the 4th, pretty standard stuff. To draft Cooper Beebe, the offensive lineman out of Kansas State. So there's ways to address that. You hold on to 45, you funnel 45 to pick up, a Braden Fiskey to add to your defensive interior, or a Kingsley Suamataia. If you don't get that offensive tackle, you can land that offensive tackle in the 2nd round, a Patrick Paul out of Houston, all these others. So I do think that maybe there's an opportunity here for the Saints to get really aggressive and help themselves over on the offensive side. It's been a defensive heavy free agency. Maybe that leans into an offensive heavy draft, and that's certainly one way that they could go about it. Now, they could go and make a move to trade up and draft their preferred wide receiver in this year's first round, or they could hold on to that first round pick and potentially bring in a wide receiver that's already proven that they can do it at the NFL level. We'll break down how that can work and who it is as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. I use Game Time constantly, whether I'm shopping for tickets, whether I'm wanting to buy a gift for somebody. I've got friends coming into town. New Orleans is a destination city, so when people show up, you want to take them to go and do stuff, but you don't want to break the bank doing that all the time. And sometimes people make those trips on a spontaneous last-minute situation, and so you've got to be able to adjust to that as well, and Game Time opens up all the opportunity for you to do that without breaking the bank in the process. With their flash deals, their all-in-one pricing, your ability to see the view from your seats before you buy the tickets, it just creates a lot of transparency in the ticket purchasing process, which can be clutch, especially in last-second situations, which Game Time is built to help you through. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app and use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family, what if the New Orleans Saints do want to get aggressive with their draft capital now that they have addressed maybe their biggest need from their perspective this offseason being edge rusher, and instead of wanting to move up in the draft for a young guy, maybe they want to go with an established veteran like Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver Tee Higgins. All right, let's get crazy here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always. Making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, tomorrow, March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, on Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 YouTube feed, the first national sports 24/7 stream on YouTube of its kind. March 20th, 7 p.m. Get you the best MLB season preview you're going to get, featuring all of our Locked On local experts across the MLB here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So check that out tomorrow, March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the 24/7 national streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, or on the free Amazon TV channels app. So what if the New Orleans Saints decide, well, moving up for a wide receiver in the first round could be sexy, could be fun, could be aggressive, all these other things, but maybe the Giants, you're worried that they wouldn't be willing to play ball. The Titans, maybe you're worried they wouldn't be willing to play ball. Maybe getting into the top 5, the asking price might be too steep with the Los Angeles Chargers. Trying to get in with the Atlanta Falcons at 8, you're going to get charged a premium there. And by then, you might miss out on the top 3 wide receivers by that point, right? Within the top 7, top 8 is kind of where we expect those 3 guys to go. And so maybe instead you want to say, you know what, I want to not worry about all that at all. I want to hold on to my first round selection. I'm perfectly comfortable picking at 14, but I want to add this veteran wide receiver or this, big bodied possession wide receiver that can do a little bit of everything. Well, why not call up the Cincinnati Bengals and Tee Higgins? Now, there's a couple of caveats in all of this. What's the asking price for Tee Higgins? And the biggest price that we should discuss there is, how do you pay Tee Higgins, right? Because he's on the franchise tag, so he's got to show up here, take a new deal, all those other things. So how do you work all of that out? We've got a couple of options, a couple of ideas on how to get that done. So you're trading for Tee Higgins on the franchise tag. In order for you to really be able to do that from the money side, you got to be able to extend him. And when you extend him, then you build out your contract, right? Backloaded contract, gets more expensive as the deal goes on, vet minimum this year, signing bonus, that's prorated over the course of 5 years, keep the hit low, right? So that's got to be a big piece. You got to get him to agree to that contract. That's got to be a part of the deal. It's got to be a part of the trade effectively. So with all of that, the thing that I would also look for is what would it take to trade for him? Well, our good friend Jordan Schultz from over at Bleacher Report has kind of given us a little bit of that information, saying that there's a good chance that this trade could happen for a second round pick. And in some cases, he even estimated that a third round pick might be able to get it done depending upon the offers elsewhere. Now, we've seen a trend around the NFL here over the course of the past few years where when disgruntled players end up wanting out, it's a second and a fifth round pick. You can see this across a bunch of things. If you want the most, or a bunch of different deals. If you want the most recent one, look no further than Brian Burns right across the division with the NFC South Carolina Panthers. They had the chance to get 2 first round picks from the Los Angeles Rams. Les Snead and the school of F them picks was ready to shell out 2 firsts to get them. They waited 16 months too late, got a second and a fifth from the New York Giants, which, by the way, might make the New York Giants a little bit more likely to play ball when it comes to potentially trading up, because they got a pair of seconds, so they might be able to move up. Sort of a little bit more flexibility in that way. So the next piece to it is, what would it take to get him there? Well, if you can get him for a second and 1 or even 2 of those 5th round picks, you got 4 5th round picks here. That takes and checks off a big old box when it comes to your needs this offseason and what you would be looking for in this year's draft. Oftentimes on this show, we have mocked a wide receiver to the Saints in the second round. So how about getting a wide receiver with that second round pick, but instead of getting one that you're hoping will translate to the NFL, you're getting one that you have seen translate to the NFL, and in a similar system than what you're trying to implement here in New Orleans with sort of that wide zone sort of look. Now, the Cincinnati Bengals do a lot more straight drop back, stand in the pocket, deliver, not as much play action, not as much motion either, although you do see more of both, or you certainly see more motion. I don't know if you see more of the play action usage in New Orleans or have seen it. I think that's more over there. But anyway, in any case, it's a similar offense, and it's an offense that you could see similarities in, with Zach Taylor going over from the school of McVay, Shanahan, both kind of creating their versions of this wide zone offense, all of that. And so you get a guy that is proven in that system, that has worked with a quarterback that has some mobility, but is not a mobile quarterback that's relying on his legs, right? So you've got a similar feel in terms of stand and deliver type of offense. And then you have the ability to be able to continue to evolve them and evolve with the offense. Also a willing blocker over on the perimeter as well. I mean, there's a lot that fits there. Now, let's be real. It could sound too good to be true. And we're talking, pipe dreams and all these other things, as they like to say, but why not explore the option of what's now possible? And this is why the additions that happen in free agency are so important. It's why so many Saints fans were kind of up in arms by the fact that the Saints weren't doing a ton to start off the free agency period. We knew that the second phase of free agency was when they were going to be more involved, but I understood sort of the concerns around how they weren't moving, the attrition that it was paired with, not a lot of additions, but still a lot of losses, all those other things. Even Andrus Peat, set to visit with the Tennessee Titans as well. Like, that could be another loss. So that's one that you probably kind of expected anyway. And I don't think that would be, the worst situation to force the Saints to have to continue to try to find solutions in their offensive line, which I do think needs some attention, some makeup, all of those other things. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad situation there. The thing that's really key about this trade, about moving a second and a fifth, maybe some future picks, maybe some other picks that end up going with it in order to get T. Higgins, is that you hold on to your first round pick at 14. Then you really get the opportunity to sit back and do whatever you want at 14. Just the consistent no man when it comes to drafting a tight end in the first round, in particular in the top 20, top 15, would even be fine with the Brock Bowers selection at that point. Brock Bowers, Quinyon Mitchell over on the defensive side. If you want to continue to focus on the offensive side, you could go Olu Fashanu at 14 if he falls. You could still address your offensive line at 14 if you want to. Troy Fautano, a guy out of Washington that can play on the inside as well. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can go. In the mock that I did that includes this trade, I was able to draft Brock Bowers at 14, trade the second and fifth and one of the fifths for T. Higgins. I think I threw in a future fourth or something like that. That might not actually be necessary, but I just did it to make sure that it happened. And then I did the same trade. I moved 170 and 175, so I can get up to 127 to draft Cooper Beebe, the interior offensive lineman out of Kansas State. And then I was able to just kind of focus on the rest of my remaining needs after that. Javon Foster, the tackle out of Missouri, just to add a little bit more there. Even if I'm the Saints in this scenario, and then I didn't worry about, I didn't get the offensive line stuff done that I wanted to get done in free agency, I still add a guard, I still add a tackle that are both very talented, and particularly a guard that could compete to start in this draft. Then I turn around and I added Dejon Anthony, the safety out of Ole Miss, gives you a little bit of a coverage guy, but that's also a short tackler, very low missed tackle rate for his position, has some downhill ability too, so a good special teamer potentially. I was able to add Steele Chambers, the linebacker out of Ohio State. Again, very good tackler, good defender, good run defender, has a little bit of coverage ability, probably a little bit more of a special teamer perhaps to start off, and depth. That's okay. You've addressed linebacker for your starters, but continue to build depth makes sense. Then I wanted to add somebody to the defensive interior, and so I went with Evan Anderson out of Florida Atlantic to wrap up the draft. Pretty happy with that if it also means that I get T. Higgins. And if I have T. Higgins and Brock Bowers that I'm adding to my offense, if I have T. Higgins and Olu Fashanu that I'm adding to my offense, if I have T. Higgins that I'm adding to my offense, and then I also go out there and I get a Johnny Newton or a Byron Murphy in the first round at defensive tackle, pretty dang happy with that too. So real opportunity here for the Saints to be as aggressive as they want to be in a variety of different ways, as you can see, with some of their draft capital now that they've landed Chase Young. Again, I think continuing to add to the offensive line in particular over the course of free agency, and they will continue to add to wide receiver and all the other stuff, but continue to add to the offensive line in free agency certainly opens up more of those opportunities for you without a doubt too. So still work to be done, but real opportunity here to be aggressive and could all of a sudden turn from a starting offseason to a pretty freaking fun offseason. Next thing that I want to do is I want to look at Chase. I want to look at Chase Young's contract, which we're gonna dive even deeper into tomorrow. But then I also want to tell you about where I think the weakest spot in the draft is and where I think the Saints should avoid making selections if they can. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Well, Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gives you the most from your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing includes risk, including loss. Limitations apply to 401ks and IRAs. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for a minimum of 1 year from the date of your first 3% match. Must keep your Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA is available to all U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are going to be active in this year's draft, that's for sure, especially with 9 selections and a big gap between 45 and 150 as of right now in terms of where they're currently projected to select. Now, trades and things like that can, of course, change that. However, there's a spot where I think the New Orleans Saints might want to avoid making any selections because there's a bit of a weird drop-off where value doesn't match up in this year's draft. Let's explain as we continue on with today's episode. We appreciate you. Don't forget, we are your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to do a deeper dive into Chase Young's contract. We still don't have contract structure yet. Signing bonus, at least at the time that I'm recording this. As I'm saying this, we don't have those details. Signing bonus, void years, all other stuff. So once we get that, which hopefully we get today, we'll dive into it. If we don't get those exact details today, we're going to discuss how this contract could look. So no matter what, we're doing contract talk tomorrow around Chase Young. And then, of course, keeping you up to date with everything going on with the New Orleans Saints as their free agency feels like it's really, really getting started. The first thing I want to discuss when it comes to the contract, though, is I do want to get one thing out of the way. I don't think that this is an overpay. This is exactly what we expected. 1 year, $13 million. It's fully guaranteed. But just to put it in perspective, 1 year ago, last year with the in the offseason, the Minnesota Vikings signed a 6'6", 280-pound, 270-pound edge rusher by the name of Marcus Davenport. Now, Marcus Davenport, obviously, with the team that he was formerly with, the New Orleans Saints, did not have the most productive season the year before. He was coming out of that 2022 season with just a half sack. Over the course of the offseason, the Minnesota Vikings signed Marcus Davenport to a 1-year, $13 million deal with $10 million guaranteed. Now, I know that sack numbers aren't everything, but Marcus Davenport didn't have impressive pressure numbers. He was ejected, technically, more often than he had a sack, a half sack, and 1 ejection at the end of the season. So now you compare that to a 7.5 sack season for Chase Young in between 2 teams where he was traded from Washington to the San Francisco 49ers, 66 total pressures, which would have led the New Orleans Saints for really the past few years, if we're being honest. Not combined, but if you take those 66 pressures and apply them to any of the last few years for the New Orleans Saints defense, he would have led the team in pressures. He gets 1 year, $13 million, just like Marcus Davenport got, but he gets $3 million more guaranteed. He gets a fully guaranteed deal of $13 million, as opposed to what Marcus Davenport got, which was $10 million guaranteed. So that's a perspective that I use when I look at this deal. I don't think that it's a bad deal for Chase Young. Now we can use the Marcus Davenport contract as a way to get an idea of what the Chase Young contract might look like, because the Vikings and Saints do a lot of similar things with their contracts. So if we don't have the full details yet, that's kind of the the framework that we'll use in tomorrow's episode as we dive into the contract. So I did want to just address that really quick. I know I promised you we would start with the weakest spot of the draft. I apologize, but I really wanted to make sure I got that in there too. So let's take a look at where I think the Saints should avoid making selections in this year's draft. And I think that it lies in between like 125 to 150. And I know that's kind of a small range, but that's effectively a full round. That's effectively the 4th round, which is tricky because you've got 4 5th-round selections. And so trading those 5th-round selections to move into the 3rd round, trading those 5th-round selections or any collection of those 5th-round selections to move into the top 100 is going to be challenging. But it feels like that sort of like 120-ish range, unless somebody falls. I did that mock draft to where I did 170 and 175, and I traded both of those up to 127 so that I could draft Cooper Beebe. I did that because he was still on the board. Like, you know what I mean? But in terms of just making selections in those rounds, there's a weird sort of area in this year's draft. I'm trying to figure out sort of what the bounds of it are or what the extremes of it are. But there's a weird spot to where it feels like the selections are too early for the value. And then there's all of these players that are kind of in that zone. And then all of a sudden, the value of the players that are available becomes more appropriate. So like, there's a lot of players that I wouldn't spend an early day 3 pick on, but there's a lot of players that I would spend a mid day 3 or late day 3 pick on. So there's this weird sort of cold spot in this year's draft where things just feel like you're not getting the return on the investment. And really, it might even bump up a little bit early. There's a couple of those prospects like Cooper Beebe. There's a couple other prospects that I'd probably throw in there too. A James Williams out of Miami. There's, potential for Theo Johnson to kind of be in that range, the Penn State tight end. So there's some selective players that maybe you can make value there. But really, you might be able to go to like 100 to 150 and have like 5 prospects that really, really make sense in that area that I would spend 101 on, or I would spend 149 on, right? And I would feel comfortable with that. But then outside of that, there's a lot of guys that I would see in like the 100s, like 100 aughts, 100 teens, that I'd rather spend 150 or later on. And then there's guys towards the end of that where it's like 140 is still feels like a little bit too early. Like I'm not really worried about moving up for those guys because I can wait around and see if they're there at 150. And if they're not, it's not at the end of the world because 150, 168, 169, 170, 175, whatever collection of those selections the Saints actually have. I just threw out a bunch of numbers. Sorry. I'd be perfectly comfortable waiting to see if they're going to be there or perfectly comfortable with the prospects that I know could be around at that time. Does that make sense? So it feels like there's just a certain portion of this draft where the value doesn't make sense, not spending that high a selection on this talent. And then the talent kind of runs together towards the end where I'm like, no, I can just wait until out of the 150s and get a similarly talented player than I might get at 113, that I might get at 120, all these other things. So it's an interesting thing because the Saints are equipped to move up. And so if you're equipped to move up, you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to see them do that. But you have to move up with a specific prospect in mind, which is often the case, right? And, it's very rare that a team goes, or I don't even know if it's rare. It's not a thing that teams go, I got 150, I got 168, but I don't want to wait this long. So I'm going to package both of those. I'm going to move up to 120-ish and I'm going to make my selection there. We'll just see who's on the board, right? It's that pick comes up. There's a player on the board that fits the value that your team really likes. They call that team that's up on the clock and they say, hey, I want to get there. Or they see it, 2 picks down the way to where there's 4 prospects on the board that they really love. And they call somebody 2 picks away and say, hey, I want to move up. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. So you're waiting to see how the board falls before you make any of those selections. And it feels like that's exactly where the New Orleans Saints should go. But I don't know if there's that much talent between 100 and 150 that's indistinguishable from the talent 150 on. And it's kind of strange. So top 100 and then 150 on kind of feel like sweet spots. And then there's this kind of weird dead zones where there's like 4 or 5 prospects that are like, yes, you could go and get them in that area. And outside of that, I might be willing to sit on my hands and just wait to see what's going on later on in the draft. Or I'm trading some of those guys or some of those picks for established veteran guys from other teams if there's a contract that I feel like I'm okay to take on. All right, so that's our crazy episode for this week, right? Rome Odunze in the first round, trading up to just outside the top 5. We talk about trading for T. Higgins, all that. You can call it an unhinged episode of Locked On Saints today, but I do hope that you enjoyed it as we took a look at how free the Saints' possibilities all of a sudden have become after the signing and how much more free they could get if they're making the right decisions in free agency, particularly if they can address their offensive line. So lots of possibilities lying ahead for the New Orleans Saints. You know we're breaking it down every single step of the way here on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans with Jake Madison, Locked On LSU with Caroline Fenton. We appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.